Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We've been through a lot together. We've come a long way since 1974 and the guttural scream, that primal anger of the original. By the time we get to the 2000s, you might have expected the chainsaw to be fully out of gas. And in some ways that's very true, but things had really just changed in the horror scene, and it was a very different world in the 2000s than it had been in the 70s. What then, if you own the rights to this property, do you do with it? Do you just start again with another reboot? No. We've been down that road too many times. This film, Texas Chainsaw 3D, decided instead to do something that the Halloween film released in 2018 got much more credit for doing, which was to ignore all the sequels and go back and be a direct sequel to the original. I'm not normally a fan of that technique. It's sort of cheap to rob fans of those later sequels of the enjoyment of their film, knowing that that is just really a dead end in the storyline. But here it's a little bit different, since none of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, except for the prequel we just discussed last video, really bears any continuity with any of the other films, except maybe the first film. This is just another example of a soft reboot. And its heart is definitely in the right place. Casting Marilyn Burns and Gunnar Hansen in minor roles really does show that they cared this time and had a sense of the scale of importance of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That said, it's a film very much in the mold of the Collector or Saw series. And that actually makes good sense, because as much as fans of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre might not want to admit it, that film did start the ball rolling on what today is known as torture porn. The hook scene, you know the one I'm talking about, is the clearest indicator of what was to come in that particular type of body or violation horror. But let's not get sidetracked into all that. It's only going to lead us into conversations we really don't want to have. I really want to talk about what this movie does thematically to the original film's setup. In this film, the character of Heather is actually invited to the Sawyer homestead, as it were. It's not the house from the original. They intentionally destroy that house because that's not the relevant metaphor for this type of film that wants to say something for the 2000s. But she's invited. She doesn't trespass. In fact, she is family. And that's important because the movie is actually making a statement about what has happened to the concept of family in American society. If you go back to that 1974 film, the makeshift family of friends that are on the road trip, they're dysfunctional, yes, and they certainly represent a cultural in denial of its roots. That is, the violence that provides the meat. Those kids are very entitled, and they have their high-minded ideals only by ignoring how the sausage is made. But in this film, the family of friends is not just dysfunctional, they're actually very much cannibalistic. Hold that thought for a second, and you're not processing what I mean. If you actually look at them, Heather's friends are really the ones that are preying on her. Her best friend is sleeping with her boyfriend, or maybe it's her boyfriend sleeping with her best friend, but either way, there's a lot of betrayal going on there. And the hitchhiker they meet along the way and quickly add to the family set tries to rob her family homestead. The regular society is completely corrupt and is all looking to gnaw at the bones of the one character who genuinely wants to do well. She's an artist, she's a gentle soul. So of course, all of her friends, her family, victimize her. There's one exception. The family she never knew, the one whose house was burned down by an angry society, is ready to embrace her. He lives in the basement, and in any other time he would be the villain of the film. But here, Leatherface is actually protecting Heather from those around her pretending to be friends, that makeshift family, but are actually preying on her, using her, abusing her. Leatherface has been recontextualized as a pure version of America. It's looking back at that dysfunction from the 70s with the awareness that what comes later is more devious and more insidious. Yes, Leatherface is a murderer, but this film abstracts that. The murders are not important because everyone he kills is part of a society that has degraded itself. Only Heather and Leatherface remain. They're a makeshift family of two, but they're pure and they understand each other. Now, the film is not without its problems, continuity being a big one. For a film that wants to disclude all the sequels and go back and be a sequel to the original, it has real problems with the timeline that would make that possible. It really shouldn't be set in modern days, but we know it is because we see cell phones. So it has problems, and I'm not trying to overlook that. It's also a little bit weird in its pacing. There's even a set piece set up in the middle of the film with a carnival that's just not paid off in any satisfactory way. But that's not really important. What's important is this film feels like those direct-to-video 90s sequels. And if you view it through that lens, it's a very ambitious film for what it is. Seeing it in the movie theater when it was released, I remember thinking, this is an oddly small-looking film to be watching on such a big screen. And I think for a lot of people, they didn't look back at the film ever again. Or if they did, it was with a preconceived notion that it was just a small, minor, flawed film. It's all those things, but that's not actually a weakness. It's actually a strength. Because the Texas Chainsaw Massacre concept has always been built in social ideals. You don't need money. You don't need those set pieces to explore that territory. And the original doesn't. You don't need the big underground lair from the second film or the body pit sequence from the third. You just don't need that stuff to convincingly tell a Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Say something about society, turn on the ultra-violence, and create great popcorn entertainment. It's a simple and yet elusive formula. This is a series that has a lot of problems. It also has a lot of films that are guilty pleasures. I really like Texas Chainsaw 3D, and I know I'm in the minority. That doesn't bother me in the least. It has an idea, and it kind of gets there. And where it fails in ways that those early 90s direct-to-video sequels used to fail all the time. I have some nostalgia for that. And while I never would say that nostalgia should be the basis of anyone's film criticism, it can be the basis for what you enjoy as entertainment. So, taken as what it is, I'll take Texas Chainsaw 3D. It didn't start the new franchise the way it wanted to, and that's nothing new for this series. But it provided me with an hour and a half of solid entertainment. Let me know what you thought of the film in the comments below.